Really excited. I have Manuela joining us, the head of marketing at Fellow. Welcome. I just found out that Manuela is actually visiting family in Colombia. So we are an international webinar today.
Yeah, very international. I'm joining from a city called Pereira in Colombia.
Fantastic. We were actually just sharing, my old CEO was from Cali, Colombia. Such an amazing and beautiful country. So great that you are able to join us.
Very, very excited to be here, Nicole. And yeah, I think we're going to have a very candid conversation. So hopefully everyone attending and watching will get some good insights out of it.
100%. I'm going to go ahead and get us started just because I know we only have 29 minutes now. But welcome everyone to part 2 of our May webinar series on fueling your content strategy. Like I said, really excited to have Manuela Barcenas with us, head of marketing at Fellow. Last week, we heard from Lauren from MyFitnessPal. She gave us a really great deep dive into them looking at their almost decade plus old blog, how they wanted to align it to their marketing strategy and to their goals, and the importance that a blog still has in 2024 marketing strategy. And today, as we look at enterprise content strategy, we know that there's a lot that sometimes, the long-term planning can be amazing, but sometimes we lose that agility, that desire to test and experiment. And so we want to kind of dive in and take some lessons from scrappy, fierce, fast-moving startups and figure out how we can use that into our enterprise content strategies. A few housekeeping before we dive in. Everyone in the audience is on auto mute, so please use the chat and Q&A feature. I'll be keeping an eye on both of those. Would love to leave some time at the end for questions. We are recording the webinar, so don't worry, you will get a copy of this in your inbox tomorrow. And then, like I mentioned, Manuela is traveling. A lot of us are working from home. Just a little grace for any wild or crazy technical snafus. If anything comes up, we'll troubleshoot and get right back to it. So with that, Manuela, welcome. Do you want to share just a little bit about your role at Fellow? And we love Fellow here at Composely, big fans, but just maybe give a little overview for folks who maybe aren't familiar with what you guys do.
Thank you, Nicole. Yes, my name is Manuela. Thank you to everyone who joined us live and to everyone who will watch this after. As Nicole said, I'm the head of marketing at Fellow. Fellow is a Canadian company, and we're building meeting transcription and meeting management software for remote and hybrid teams. So I joined Fellow as the first marketing hire back in 2018. And it's been a really fun ride. I basically joined to help the CEO write the copy for the first ever website. I built the first ever website with the help of some freelancers. We announced the product for the first time back in 2018. So it's been a wild ride because now Fellow is a very well-established product and brand. Nicole, you told me you use it. So that was very surprising for me to hear. It's awesome to know more and more teams that I start getting to know are using it on a daily basis because I joined the company when it was just an idea, basically. So I'm excited to talk about that and give you all my candid advice and learnings in this next 30 minutes.
That is perfect and really tease us up perfectly for kind of our first section that we're going to dive into, which is this idea of long-term planning versus marketing teams staying agile and following market trends. And so for good and bad, quick anecdote, when I was graduating from college, I remember interviewing with Procter & Gamble, and it was, to me, that was the dream job, go work at P&G. And I met with one of their brand managers who spent almost 30 minutes, like the entire length of our webinar, talking about this big project they were owning. And at the end, I found out that the project was adding 6 pods to a box of Cascade, which is dishwasher detergent. But it took her 6 months to get that across the finish line just because of how long and, manufacturing and SKUs and on design. And I was like, wow, that's amazing for you. But that feels like a very small project to take such a large amount of time. And at startups, on the flip side, we're very agile. You get the first version of a website out, and then immediately you're getting onto the second. So I'd love to hear how you guys at Fellow are balancing that long-term planning while maintaining some flexibility.
Yeah, I think the long-term planning begins with the company vision, right? And I think sometimes as marketers, we feel that it is our responsibility to come up with that vision and that brand, and like what is like the mission that our brand has. And in reality, most of the times as marketers, we are not the founder of the company, right? So I do have this belief, and I've also heard other marketers that I admire and follow say this, that the long-term vision comes from the founders and the CEO. So I think that is very important. And I'm saying this, Nicole, because I think that you have to get that sometimes out of your CEO and understand, okay, what is your long-term vision for the company and your long-term vision for the brand and for the product? And as a marketing team, we can start planning with that long-term vision in mind, right? So when you talk about balancing long-term versus short-term planning, I do think in the long term when I think about the Fellow brand, but that starts from the CEO, right? Like the CEO knows that Fellow has to be known as the company solving the world's meeting problem. And we want to be trusted because we are surrounding ourselves by professionals, experts, forward-thinking leaders. But we always want to frame ourselves as this company that is obsessed about this meeting problem. So for marketers here, it could be about a very different problem that you're solving. But I think that long-term planning starts from that vision. And then you can say, okay, how am I going to build a brand that transmits that long-term vision, right? Like maybe your brand now will focus on always talking about that problem. That brand will now perhaps lead you to create content like what we've done at Fellow, which is a podcast, a blog, a newsletter, which sometimes are channels that are not immediate in terms of conversions and demand creation. But that over time, if you consistently mention this mission and this problem that you're solving to the world, I think that's like where the long-term planning is on one hand. But then speaking of short-term planning, I also wanted to say, I think in startup land and startup culture, it's impossible to plan more than 1 quarter in advance. Like I recently heard an interview about this. There are 2 podcasts that I follow, the Dave Gerhardt Exit 5 podcast for B2B marketing leaders. And then there's Emily Kramer's Marketing One or MKT1 podcast. So just so you know, a lot of things that I say resonate with their visions as well. And one of them was talking about this concept of short-term planning in startups and how it's really impossible to plan ahead. And you should only be planning 1 quarter in advance because the market changes so rapidly. So I'm going to give you an example. Fellow was not an AI product, right? And this happened to a lot of companies in the software space recently. But with the rise of AI and the demand for AI products, our customers started asking us like, hey, when is Fellow releasing AI transcription? When is Fellow releasing AI summaries? Like you already have this awesome product for meeting agendas, meeting templates, but now the market demand is changing. So in startups, I think you need to react very fast to those market changes. And that's why it's impossible to plan more than 3 months in advance. And one book, Nicole, that I would recommend to anyone watching about this is called The 12-Week Year by Brian Moran. And it speaks about this concept of planning only 12 weeks, only in groups of 12 weeks, because market demand and changes happen so fast.
Yeah, and a lot to unpack there. I love going back to that vision, though. I think it's so easy. And it's one of the benefits I think larger organizations have is when you have more resources, ideally the leadership team is spending their time laser focused on the mission, the vision, the strategy, making sure that's clearly documented. And the downside of startups is sometimes, CEOs are wearing many hats, as many folks in startups do. And maybe don't have that time to have a very documented. It sounds like Fellow, you guys have a great example of what that can look like. And so at the enterprise level, so great that I think that's actually a advantage that an enterprise marketer might have, and is a great reminder that when you're building out your content strategy and you're building out these larger plans, to make sure it is always tying back up to the top and not, running on ancillary paths that maybe don't align to it. And then talking about the flexibility, I mean, absolutely. when you're on an enterprise, it's kind of like a big cargo ship, and it takes a while to turn that. And startups are maybe a little more like a speedboat, and so we think adapting to that can be a little bit easier. With that, what are some ways you mentioned some great resources, some podcasts, some books, but what are other ways that you try to stay in tune with the market and like that customer feedback?
Yeah, I think that's really important for marketers in any organization, right? Whether you're at a startup or an enterprise. Um, I think regardless of the product you're selling, you should be obsessed with your ideal customer profile, right? Or your ideal customer who is coming to your website and then becoming a paid customer, right? And then expanding, like for example, a product like Fellow, who is bringing it to their organization and then paying for it and inviting a lot of users. So that's some of the things I'm obsessing about these days. So for Fellow, for example, leaders in operations roles are really important to us, right? Like a VP of operations, a COO. Why? Because they care about meeting efficiency and they care about process. And sometimes their companies are scaling so rapidly that they need to implement software to make sure that those processes are in place, right? So going back to your question on understanding the market, and I will also say understanding your ideal customer, I think listening to discovery calls, like that's key. If you're working at an enterprise company, you probably have a very solid sales team with sales processes. So I listen to discovery calls every week. Sometimes while I'm getting ready, sometimes while I'm going for a walk, almost like as a podcast, as a way to stay connected to the customer. Also LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn could be like an underrated channel to learn about the market and your ideal customer. So I follow our ideal customers. Like when I see someone in an operations role on LinkedIn, I follow them because I want to understand what are they posting about, what's on their mind, how can I, like understand their day-to-day struggles better. And then, yeah, conferences. I think conferences have been really important for me as well because it's a place where I can go and meet people in person. And I make the effort to talk to those ideal customer profiles or personas whenever I go to an event. So, yeah, I think obsessing with that ideal customer persona and really trying to be empathetic on like what do they really care about. And I think as marketers, it's a challenge because like the advice of like it's better to use your own customers' words than your own words, right? Like so I think understanding your customers is another great way to understand what's going on in the market because they will tell you, right?
Absolutely. And I know some things that I've seen really successful too is, having like a customer win Slack channel and trying to find ways to bridge the gap between marketing, sales, and your CS team and trying to uncover those small wins. I feel like as marketers, we always look for those customer wins and customer stories that can feel like, okay, I have to go have this big interview and write a long blog post or do a 5-minute video. And just also trying to find more of those like smaller moments. And I think trying to embrace like encouraging CS to share like, hey, I just heard from this, or this is a small win that's going well. Again, keeps you kind of plugged into what's going on and what really is the value and what people are enjoying about your product.
I'll share 3 things that we do related to what you said. So yeah, we do have a customer insights channel in Slack. So the customer support and implementation teams post insights there all the time. We also have a weekly town hall meeting where everyone in the company attends. And as part of that town hall meeting, there is a customer insights section. So every week, someone shares a customer story. Yeah. And then at the marketing team on a marketing team level, we have a bi-weekly team meeting, and our product marketing manager is responsible for bringing one customer story every 2 weeks. So those are 3 different ways in which we're like building processes to make sure that everyone is consistently hearing about the customer.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a really important thing. How do you do you guys use a call recording software for the demo calls and stuff like that?
Yes. So we are going to start using Fellow for that just because we released our AI meeting Copilot recently. So we are transitioning into using Fellow for those because it only makes sense to use our own product for everything we do, right?
Got it. Absolutely. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. I think another thing that can really help with like the long-term planning and being flexible is having a documented plan. How do you guys actually work on documenting it and kind of sharing that externally?
Yeah. So at Fellow, we're big believers in documentation. So we use Confluence for that. I think documentation is key for any remote team. And we have a podcast, and maybe we can talk about it as a tactic later. But our podcast is called Super Managers. And one of the episodes that always keeps coming back is this episode with the CEO of remote.com, where he said that one of the most important things you can do as a remote company is to build a culture of responding with a link, which means any process you have, any knowledge you have, you document it in your company wiki so that whenever someone asks you about it, you just respond with a link. So at Fellow, we have this culture of responding with a link. And you asked about documentation. So yes, we use Confluence, and in Confluence, we document our project briefs. We document our goals, like our quarterly team goals. We document a lot of processes, from like how to upload a blog post to the Fellow website to how to publish a Super Managers podcast episode. So all that is documented as a page in Confluence. And Nicole, to me, it has been super helpful, because every time I hire someone new for the team, I just send them those pages, right? I have an onboarding checklist ready for them to read all those pages, and I don't have to repeat myself over and over again in terms of how to do things.
Yes, I'm going to do a small plug for our webinar 2 weeks from now, which is with the head of content at Notion, because
Awesome.
Notion has been one of our big similar, making sure that we have that documentation, everything goes in there. And very much so. Sometimes annoyingly send with a link, be like, hey, here's the answer to your question. Also, here is the link to it in Confluence or in Notion, which just reinforces.
Yeah. And I think, for example, if the CEO or leadership team express that this is a part of the culture, then it doesn't become like passive aggressive, let's call it, right? Because like if you just say like, there's a page about this, maybe the other person might think like, oh, like, sorry, I should have checked, right? But yeah, in our company, I think the CEO made it very clear, like anytime someone asks you a question over Slack, for example, respond with a link, because it might, well, I mean, not every time, but you know what I mean? It's like if it's about a process, or if it's about something that you probably know somebody else in the company will ask in another moment.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that those things like need to be communicated by the leadership team for them to work.
Absolutely. One thing that I found every time I don't do it or just assume everyone's kind of on the same page, it's immediately when I start seeing things go off the rails, to use a little racing pun. But having a documented content calendar, whether that's in a project management tool like Asana or Monday, or as simple as a Google Sheet. Honestly, sometimes I think Google Sheets are really easy and helpful for that visualization. It just suddenly gets everyone so much on like the same page. And so again, we use Fellow, but having that and including it in like our team meetings and making sure that we're pulling it up and kind of tracking, so that it's like you don't have to micromanage teams to that either. And I think sometimes, to point, startups aren't the best at that documentation. And it's something that I think enterprises do really well. And so just like finding that middle ground of here's the calendar, but then encouraging your teams or the folks who are closest to the work or closest to the customer to like feed that market feedback back up and be willing to make some adjustments if it's in the best interest of the overall mission, vision, brand, and in the best interest of the customer.
Yeah, you're right. I will say, even from the early days of Fellow, we received a lot of praise from new employees that joined the company that said, wow, like you guys document a lot of things. Like usually startups do not do that. But I think it also comes because our founders were part of, their first company was acquired by SurveyMonkey. So they did have, like they did have experience of going from like a scale up to then joining an enterprise, which is SurveyMonkey. So I think a lot of those enterprise learnings have also been applied at Fellow, which is very interesting, right? It's like a good mix of like enterprise company habits with like the speed of a startup.
Exactly. And that's the goal for today is, how to find like the best of both worlds in that. The other big thing, and we've kind of alluded to it in our conversation so far, but is this idea of silos. And I would say marketing is often like if you're not a marketer, I don't think you realize how much marketing touches every aspect of the business or should be touching every aspect of the business. And especially for remote, but just any enterprise company, like the more delegation, the more teams you have, silos are just going to be inevitable in that. And I think that's one of the things I love about startups that I've been in is the ability to just ping who you need, you know exactly who owns it. There's not a lot of like red tape or hierarchy, and you can either get an answer or collaborate, which is amazing. And so I'm curious how you've seen marketing leaders like communicate or like how you have kind of tried to reduce that silo at Fellow and maybe some advice for folks
Yeah.
organization.
Like I said before, I think one of my big sources of inspiration or marketing role models has been Dave Gerhardt, and I know he is for a lot of people in
Absolutely.
tech. But it's funny because like I was following him when he was working at Drift. I don't know, for people attending who don't know about it. It's a company in Boston. They grew very rapidly. So it was very inspiring to see his career journey there. And one of the things that Dave Gerhardt, for example, used to do at Drift is every Friday he would organize a show and tell, I believe, or the Drift company would organize a show and tell where every team had to show and tell what they were working on. So even though they were scaling very rapidly and they were a very large organization, they found this moment for like the team to come together, like for 30 minutes on Friday, perhaps. And maybe like they would rotate. I think they would rotate, like maybe like this Friday, the marketing team shows what they're up to. The next Friday, the sales team shows what they're up to. So that's one example, I think, for larger teams, because I know at Fellow, our town hall meetings are key for cross-functional communication. But I understand that at larger organizations, town halls don't happen perhaps on a weekly basis like we do at Fellow. And it's impossible to perhaps have every member of the company speak, right, at a town hall when it's a very large team. But Nicole, I will give you some context on what we do at Fellow. I'm a big believer in internal marketing, and I think marketers need to do internal marketing as part of their job, because if you don't get your team and your organization excited about what you're doing, then people outside of the organization won't be excited, right? Like you are the first ones who need to be excited about your content, about your webinars, about everything that you're doing and your product as well. And I think marketing has a big responsibility in creating that internal hype. So what I do is every Friday, our CEO Aiden hosts a town hall meeting, and it's usually the team leads or department heads presenting or speaking at these town hall meetings. But I make sure to every Friday be very intentional about what I'm sharing, communicating wins, giving shout outs, right? Like if I communicated with a sales rep and that sales rep invited a lot of people to our webinar, I give them a shout out. And it's the other way around as well. The sales reps present at the town hall meeting, they give marketing shout outs sometimes, or they present on initiatives that they're working on. So at Fellow, and I'm speaking from my own experience, it's been a very great way to maintain that cross-functional collaboration, even when we're scaling the company. So yeah, we do have a lot of content on the Fellow website, on the Fellow YouTube channel on how we run our town hall meetings, and I'm happy to send it to you as well. But I love town hall meetings. Like I actually look forward to them every Friday.
Apologies. I would love to include some of those resources in our follow-up email with the recording so folks can take a look at that. I think it would be great. And to that, like diving a little bit deeper, obviously Fellow, we use it internally. It's a big kind of rule we try to hold our team accountable for is if you're in a meeting, and especially if decisions are being made, like let's document those decisions in the Fellow notes. Let's make sure we're adding really clear agendas as to what the meetings are for. But are there other tools that you use to keep everyone on the same page?
Yeah. In the past, I've used tools like Asana, Monday, and ClickUp. Like I do think all of them are great. At the moment, I use Linear. It's a very engineering focused project management tool. but the CTO at Fellow brought it in and we adopted it org-wide. And I actually think there's a big benefit to that because I can go and see other linear boards, right? Like I can go and see what the product managers are working on, what the engineering team is working on, what the growth and sales teams are working on. So that has been very, very handy. Yeah, we use Linear for project management, and I love using the project feature to create projects, for example, for upcoming webinars. So each webinar is a project in Linear or initiatives of that nature. And then you can create Kanban boards to assign different tickets to different team members. So yeah, for me, it's a mix of Fellow for meeting management and recording those decisions, and then Linear just to project manage and make sure that everyone gets done the part of the project that they're assigned.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And I think that I've used when you have a tool like that and then leveraging that in your internal marketing cadence. So, like I've run on agile marketing before. And so if we're on a 2-week sprint, using that to share externally, like, okay, here's what we got done in the last sprint, here's what we're focusing on this sprint, and using that same project management to help drive some of that cross-functional communication.
Yeah, and the reality is nobody will be wondering what is the marketing team working on, right? Like they can go and check.
Yes, it's very, very open. How I know, I mean, I've seen a lot of when I was at ExactTarget, they had was acquired by Salesforce, if folks aren't familiar, but they, were had an office. They were so great at that internal communication with TVs, and they had teams dedicated to sharing not just, marketing wins, but customer wins and product wins. And I feel like when you're in an office, it does make it a little easier, it feels like, to reduce those silos when you're at a bigger organization or even a smaller one. How have you seen remote companies kind of embrace that so that it doesn't fall on deaf ears, that it's just, oh, it's another Slack message, oh, it's another email from, the folks? How do you try to like break out of that and make sure that the message really hits?
Yeah. One tactic that I'm seeing lately is internal podcasts. So someone who's really like entertaining, perhaps outgoing, knows a lot of people in the company. It doesn't have to be the CEO necessarily. I've seen more and more of this. They host a podcast and it's like a weekly, perhaps 20-minute recording where they share insights or news that other teams or departments send them. So that idea I really like. At Fellow, we do have an internal podcast, but I think the purpose is a little different. Our internal podcast is like to build culture. So it's not like an internal newsletter in a way. Our internal podcast is just like to get to know the team, which is also an idea. But for your question about internal communication, yeah, I think podcasts have been something cool that I've been seeing. And then something that our CEO does at Fellow is a weekly email for the entire company. I know it takes a lot of work for the CEO to do this, but I think it has been a game changer in like making sure that the company is always marching in the same direction. And you can see it in meetings, right? You can see it in cross-functional meetings. So let's say this year, as some of you might know, is the year of the dragon, right? In the Chinese zodiac. So one day our CEO sent an email saying this is the year of the dragon, which means that at Fellow, we're going to make bold decisions. We're going to move fast. We're going to act like a dragon. And then you could hear, that was the email on Sunday. And then you could hear it at cross-functional meetings, right? Between marketing and sales, marketing and product, being like, yeah, we need to move fast. This is the year of the dragon. So it all starts with that weekly email from the CEO. And then you hear leaders across departments saying these things.
I worked with when our president would do that as well. And it was always so random, which I think they do on purpose, but it was like, I just watched Jurassic Park with my son this weekend. And here's how that relates to, our current strategy. And then everyone's talking about.
Remember. Yeah.
Exactly. I love both of those ideas. Another plug, our last speaker in our series, Rachel Downey at Share Your Genius, is a podcast and storytelling company. And I know she's been working with a lot of enterprise companies on telling the internal story and that internal communication and wins. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I do think that's a fun way that it's a different medium. It's not necessarily written. So to your point, you can do it while you're taking a walk or doing the dishes, and you don't have to be staring at a screen. So I love that idea of things. It's a little different, but kind of like wraps everything together. I know there are a couple like Slack apps. I'm sure some of the other communication tools have it, but I've used Hey Taco before, which is so silly, but it's a recognition app that can kind of sit on top of Slack. And then you can give tacos to other people if they do things. So it was a great way to even kind of share or hear about what other teams are working on, because everyone can see this running list, and it would be like, hey, product person, like, great job leading this user experience interview. Here's a taco. Great job. Like, this person got great feedback from our customer on XYZ, or hey, congrats marketing on a successful webinar. Here's a taco. And so it was like a very authentic, natural, very positive way to kind of keep everyone have insight in what is happening in some other departments as well.
Yeah, I love that. We do something similar at our weekly town hall. We have a shout out section. So I know it can be a little nerve-wracking for some folks to like speak up at a town hall, but I think it also motivates people to just like share their wins or share their teammates' wins. And it has created a very nice culture at Fellow.
100%. I know that we are just at time. I would love to ask one more question before we wrap up. But before we do, I did drop Manuela's LinkedIn in the chat. So please follow her, and, I'm keep in contact. That is a great
questions. Let me know. I know 30 minutes can go really fast. So any questions, feel free to DM me or Nicole.
Yes, absolutely. And then also, if you have not registered, next week we are talking with a content specialist at Content Square, which is the umbrella company to Hotjar, if you're familiar. So really excited to sit down with her. So I'm dropping the link to the registration for that in the chat as well. But kind of last question, we've talked a lot about like the internal marketing, but one of the questions we got was on enablement in particular, and not just sharing, hey, here's what is happening, but encouraging folks to actually take action on some of the stuff that we're working on in marketing. So I'd love just to hear some final thoughts on the actual enablement piece and what you've seen work well.
This might sound like common sense, but I think for me, it all starts with talking directly to the sales reps. Like, I think what has worked for me is like building one-on-one relationships with some of our perhaps top or most proactive sales reps, and getting on 10-minute calls with them once in a while to ask, what do you need? Like, what is a piece of content that you actually would share with your prospects right now, or that people are asking you for? And I find that when you ask those questions, then those sales reps will be more likely to actually share your content, because they, like, you created it because they asked for it. And I know marketing teams all over the world struggle with this. Like, we created this PDF or this one pager and nobody's using it.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's a matter of perhaps building those relationships, communicating with them. We have a Slack channel to share these new resources. We also have a wiki page, like we were talking about, documenting all the sales resources that they can use, and we update that on a frequent basis. I'm not going to say we're perfect at this, because I think every marketing team sometimes struggles to be like, why are they not using this if we created it 2 months ago? But when
I get the ask, hey, do you have this? Like, it would be great if you could create this. And I was like, yep, it's been in this document for 4 months. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I think what has worked is when we talk to the sales reps, and then one of them is like a champion. Okay, you know how software has champions? So for example, perhaps you become the champion of Fellow at your organization, and perhaps the company rewards you, perhaps the company can send you swag. I feel like it has worked for us to have a couple of champions on the sales team. Absolutely. So even if like perhaps the sales leader is not, like sharing some stuff, but I'm not saying they don't share, but what I'm trying to say is like have more than one champion. One of those champions could be the sales leader, but maybe have like 1 or 2 reps that you really get along with and you communicate with frequently, and sometimes they become the ones to tell their other, their peers, their coworkers, hey, like, have you checked this out? So
I think that's a great point, because I know as you get into larger orgs and suddenly sales reps, if they feel very free to come to marketing, it's so easy to get distracted on the latest and greatest ask. So a lot of times people put more processes in place, a request form, or please share feedback through a manager. And so I think finding those moments and remembering to just go to the person and kind of not break the process, but make sure you're getting what is needed out of it, I think is a great reminder to not let the process stand in the way of just going and talking to the person.
Yeah,
But
talk to the person
yeah.
and don't assume. And yeah, sometimes I think as marketers, we can fall into the trap of assuming what our prospects need or even what the sales reps need. And just a quick conversation, even if it's a back and forth in Slack of like making sure that this is what the sales reps actually want to be sending or think that their prospects need. So I think very basic advice, but it's very like
But it's impactful. Like
almost
those,
like core, you know what I mean, to what you should be doing, like ask more questions of both your customers and your sales team.
that is such a great way to wrap up the conversation. Thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing some insights about how you guys run things at Fellow. Definitely some great insights that I hope everyone can take away. Please connect with Manuela on LinkedIn. Be sure to register for our webinar next week, and look for some of these resources in your inbox tomorrow. Thank you everyone so much. And thank you again, Manuela.
Thanks, Nicole. Bye. Talk to you
Bye,
soon.
everyone.